A 6-year-old girl collapses in the schoolyard from hunger while everyone laughs, until the billionaire's son races to her side. That moment binds their lives in a way no one sees coming. The schoolyard was alive with noise, the kind that fills every corner of space and leaves no room for quiet thoughts. Children shouted to one another across the asphalt, backpacks thumped against concrete, sneakers scraped, laughter echoed, and the air carried the sharp smell of chalk dust and autumn leaves. In the middle of this swirling chaos, where games were being played and friendships tested, a tiny 6-year-old girl moved like a ghost among the noise. Her name was Emma, and she wore a white blouse with a stiff collar, a little black skirt that fluttered in the wind, and a thin pair of shoes that had clearly walked through too many days. Her blonde hair gleamed under the afternoon sun, and her blue eyes had a quiet, tired shine, as if she didn't quite belong to this bright, noisy world around her. She had tried to stand up from the bench too quickly. She had felt the dizziness rising long before she moved, but she ignored it the way she ignored the constant ache in her stomach. She thought she could push through it just like always. But her legs betrayed her, and in one sudden, helpless moment she toppled forward, hitting the ground with a soft thud that felt much louder in her ears than it actually was. For a heartbeat the world was silent. Then the laughter came. It rose from a group of children nearby, sharp, cruel, thoughtless laughter that cut far deeper than the scrape on her knee. Someone pointed at her. Someone else mimicked the fall. A boy from the older grade snickered and muttered something she didn't catch. She lay there motionless for a moment, her face burning, her hands trembling as she pushed herself up, wishing more than anything that she could simply disappear into the cracks of the pavement. It wasn't the fall that hurt, it was the humiliation. Emma knew she was weaker than the other kids. She knew her clothes weren't as new, her lunchbox wasn't as full, her energy wasn't as bright. She also knew why. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. Her mother, Olivia, had been too weak to get out of bed that morning. The medicine was running out. The bills were piling up. Emma had watched her mother cough all night, watched the way she clutched her side, watched her try to smile through pain she could barely hide. Emma loved her mother more than anything in the world, and she would rather go hungry than see her suffer more. So she ate less. Then less. And eventually almost nothing. She thought she was doing the right thing. But her little body was reaching its limit. As she tried to stand, her vision flickered. The kids were still laughing. The world swayed. She reached for the bench, missed, and was about to fall again, when someone's hands caught her shoulders and steadied her. The laughter around her softened, then stopped, as though an invisible switch had been flipped. A tall figure knelt beside her, blocking the harsh sun. Emma blinked, confused, and looked up into a pair of calm brown eyes. It was Noah Patterson. 15 years old, tall for his age, broad-shouldered, dressed in a white shirt, navy blazer, and perfectly tailored trousers. His presence alone seemed to silence the kids around them. Noah was someone people watched from afar, admired, envied, sometimes feared. His father was worth more money than most families in town could ever imagine, and with that came a kind of unspoken respect that made even the boldest bullies step aside. But Noah himself was quiet, serious, and solitary. He rarely smiled, rarely talked, and never got involved in other people's problems. Until now. He looked at Emma as if the world around them had vanished, as if her fall wasn't something to laugh at but something that demanded immediate attention. "Hey," he said quietly, steadying her by the arm. "Are you hurt?" His voice wasn't harsh or annoyed. It was gentle, almost soft, but there was an intensity behind it, like he needed an answer. Emma tried to speak but her throat felt tight. She shook her head even though her knees still stung. Noah studied her for a few seconds, and something in his expression changed. He saw the faint shadows under her eyes. He saw how thin she was, how her hands trembled not just from embarrassment but from exhaustion. He saw hunger. Real hunger. The kind he had only read about in newspapers. Behind them, a few children muttered confusedly. They hadn't expected him of all people to intervene. Noah ignored them completely. He gently brushed the dirt from Emma's sleeve, then looked into her eyes with a seriousness that made her chest tighten. "You didn't fall because you tripped," he said quietly. "You're dizzy." She didn't deny it. She couldn't. He leaned in a little closer. "When was the last time you ate?" No one had ever asked her that question at school. No teacher. No student. No adult. It was as if Noah had looked straight into a part of her life that she had been desperately trying to hide. For a long moment she said nothing. Her lips parted slightly but no sound came out. She dropped her gaze, ashamed. And then, in the softest voice, he repeated, "It's okay. You can tell me." Emma swallowed, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Yesterday morning." It wasn't quite true. It had been even longer. But she was too afraid to admit the full reality. Noah exhaled slowly, and the look in his eyes changed from concern to something deeper, something heavy and decisive. Without another word he took off his blazer and placed it around her shoulders, shielding her from the cool wind. It felt far too large, like wearing a blanket, and she immediately felt safer. The other kids had stopped whispering entirely now. The yard seemed unnaturally still. Noah stood, offered her his hand, and when she hesitated, he said the words that would stay with her for years. "I'm with you. Don't worry. I won't let you fall again." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma believed someone. Noah Patterson had always lived in a world built on order, structure, and silent expectations. People assumed that being the son of a billionaire meant living in a bubble of privilege and comfort, where problems melted away before they even had a chance to appear. But Noah's reality was far more complicated. His days were filled with pressure disguised as opportunity, with responsibility masked as privilege, and with loneliness so familiar he no longer recognized it as loneliness at all. From the outside he seemed untouchable, tall, composed, always perfectly dressed, always top of his class, always polite in the exact way his father expected. But inside, Noah carried a constant ache, a sense that something essential was missing from his carefully curated life. He was used to people approaching him with an agenda. Teachers praised him not because he was exceptional, but because praising him meant impressing the Patterson family. Parents encouraged their children to befriend him, hoping for access to the powerful connections his last name offered. Students admired him from afar but treated him as if he were made of glass, beautiful, distant, and incapable of understanding ordinary feelings. Noah learned to keep his distance long before he learned how to speak in full sentences. He knew his role, the quiet heir, the perfect son, the future leader. There was no space in that script for vulnerability or genuine connection. School had always been a place where he moved like a shadow with a bright spotlight on him, seen, but never touched. He spent lunches alone on purpose, walking the edge of the yard with headphones on, pretending he didn't hear the rumors or the whispered comments about his family. He didn't mind being alone, he preferred it to being surrounded by people who only liked the idea of him. He never expected that one day he would find someone even lonelier than he was. But when he saw Emma fall, when he saw her body crumple onto the concrete and heard the laughter that followed, something primal stirred in him. It felt like a spark hitting dry tinder, sudden, fierce, and impossible to ignore. He hadn't hesitated. His legs moved before his thoughts caught up. All he saw was a little girl who clearly didn't have the strength to catch herself, whose shoulders were too thin for her age, whose blue eyes flickered with something that didn't belong in a child's face, exhaustion, fear, and a kind of resignation no 6-year-old should know. When she whispered that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, something inside him twisted violently, a heat rising in his chest. He had seen hunger before, in documentaries, in charity reports his father signed without reading, but never in the eyes of someone standing 3 feet away, someone trembling inside a school uniform that should have symbolized safety. As he helped her stand and wrapped his blazer around her small shoulders, He realized that the world around him had shifted. The chatter of the schoolyard faded, the faces around them blurred, and for the first time in years he felt present, painfully, intensely present. Emma wasn't just another student. She wasn't someone hoping to impress him or use him. She was a child in danger, a child who had no one else to speak for her. And Noah, despite all his structured life and silent upbringing, found that he could not walk away from her the way he had walked away from so many others. The rest of the school day passed in a haze. He sat in class but heard none of the lessons. His mind kept replaying the way Emma had looked up at him when he said, "I'm with you," as if she didn't understand why someone like him would care. That look haunted him. It bothered him that she seemed surprised by kindness, as if she had learned to expect nothing from the world. It bothered him even more that he had never noticed her before, never noticed her shrinking into herself, sitting alone during lunch, pushing food around her tray instead of eating it. He wondered how many times she had suffered in silence while he lived surrounded by abundance he didn't even appreciate. When the final bell rang, Noah didn't go home right away. He scanned the yard until he saw her again. Emma walked slowly, carefully, her little backpack bouncing lightly behind her. She wasn't wearing his blazer anymore, she must have returned it to the lost and found, too shy to give it back to him directly. He saw her struggle to adjust her collar, saw how she winced when she stepped on her scraped knee, saw how she kept looking over her shoulder as if expecting someone to scold her. On impulse, Noah followed her at a distance. Not close enough to scare her, but close enough to make sure she got home safely. The route she took surprised him. She didn't walk toward the nicer neighborhoods or the well-kept streets. Instead she turned into a quieter part of town where houses wore years of neglect and fences leaned tiredly toward the ground. Noah had never been there before. It felt like stepping into another world, one his father's wealth had always shielded him from. Emma walked up to a small house with peeling paint and sagging steps. She hesitated before opening the door, as if preparing herself for whatever waited inside. Noah saw her take a deep breath and then disappear inside the dim interior. The sight struck him harder than he expected. That night he sat at the dinner table across from his father, the polished silverware reflecting the warm chandelier light. Their house was immaculate, too large, too clean, the kind of perfection that felt cold. Noah pushed his food around his plate, unable to forget the image of Emma's trembling hands or the quiet despair in her eyes. He could feel the words building inside him, pushing against the barrier he had constructed his entire life. He lifted his gaze and met his father's sharp, calculating eyes. "Dad," he said, his voice steady but urgent, "I need to tell you something." It was the first step toward a decision that would change all of their lives. Noah had never spoken to his father the way he did that evening, not with such urgency, not with such raw emotion breaking through the calm, practiced mask he had worn for so many years. Jack Patterson paused, his fork suspended in midair, startled by the tone more than by the words themselves. His son rarely initiated conversations at dinner, and when he did, it was usually something polite, distant, or academic. But this time there was something different, something sharp and unsettling in Noah's voice that made Jack set his utensils down slowly and study his son with a level of attention he rarely offered anyone. Noah took a breath, steadying himself. He explained everything that had happened in the schoolyard, the fall, the laughter, the hunger, the way Emma's small frame shook when he touched her shoulder, the way she whispered about not eating because her mother needed the food more. As he spoke, images of Emma flickered in his mind with painful clarity, her trembling hands, her pale cheeks, her thin wrists, the desperate attempt to appear fine when she clearly was not. Jack listened without interrupting, though his expression began to darken. He wasn't the type of man to show sorrow, and compassion was a language he had forgotten long ago, but he understood danger, and he understood desperation. Something about the story hit deeper than he expected. Maybe it was the memory of his own childhood, the hunger he had endured before building his empire, the nights he had gone to bed on an empty stomach, the fear of losing the only parent he had. Or maybe it was because his son, usually silent and self-contained, was looking at him with eyes full of fire instead of indifference. When Noah finished, his voice had softened into something almost pleading. "Dad, she's 6. She collapsed because she hasn't eaten. Her mother is sick, and they're alone. We can't just do nothing." Jack leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the polished table, a faint habit from his days in the boardroom. He was a man used to solving problems with money, influence, or strategic pressure. But this wasn't a business dilemma. This was his son asking him to step into the life of a stranger and intervene where no one else had. It tugged at something in him he thought had died long ago. He didn't give an answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked to the large window overlooking the city lights, and let the silence stretch. Noah waited, his stomach twisting with dread. He feared his father would dismiss it all as childish sentiment, tell him to focus on school, or remind him that their family didn't get involved in other people's private troubles. But when Jack finally turned around, his expression had hardened into a resolute determination. "We're going to see her," he said. "Tonight." Noah blinked, startled. "What? Now?" Jack didn't wait for further questions. He was already moving toward the hallway, grabbing his coat and keys with the precision of a man preparing for something serious. "If what you're telling me is true, then waiting isn't an option," he said. "Get your jacket." Within minutes they were in one of the family cars, the engine purring softly as the city streets flew past. Noah sat in the passenger seat, his pulse racing. He had never done anything like this with his father before. They had attended galas together, charity events, business dinners, but never something personal, something raw and human. He glanced sideways at Jack, noticing the tension in his father's jaw, the controlled tightness of his grip on the wheel. Jack Patterson wasn't just acting out of empathy, this was something deeper, something that stirred old ghosts he rarely acknowledged. When they reached the neighborhood where Emma lived, the stark contrast between their world and hers became impossible to ignore. The houses here were small and worn, with fading paint and sagging roofs. Broken porch lights flickered weakly, and the streets were quiet in a way that felt heavy rather than peaceful. Noah recognized Emma's house immediately, the peeling paint, the crooked steps, the dim light seeping through a cracked curtain. He felt a jolt of nerves as they approached the door. What if Olivia was too sick to answer? What if she thought they were there to judge her? What if Emma got in trouble for speaking to him? Before he could second-guess himself, Jack knocked firmly 3 times. After a long moment, the door opened only a few inches. A pair of tired, wary eyes peered out. It was Olivia. She looked older than her years, her skin pale and thin, her hair pulled back with trembling fingers. She recognized neither of them, only 2 strangers standing in the night. "Yes," she whispered, her voice strained. Jack spoke gently, in a tone Noah had never heard him use before. "We're not here to cause trouble. Your daughter fell today at school. My son helped her." Olivia's eyes snapped toward Noah with sudden alertness, as if seeing him fully for the first time. She opened the door wider, bracing herself against the frame. "Emma, she didn't tell me anyone helped." "She didn't want you to worry," Noah said softly. "She was dizzy because she hadn't eaten." For a moment Olivia's composure cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. She looked so fragile that Noah feared she would collapse just like Emma did. "We're here," Jack said, "because you need help. And because your daughter shouldn't have to carry this alone." Olivia let out a trembling breath, torn between pride and desperation. "I didn't ask for anything," she whispered. Noah stepped forward, his voice firm but gentle. "But she needs us." That was the moment something shifted. Olivia's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hide. She opened the door and let them inside. As Noah stepped over the threshold, he felt the weight of the decision settle over him. This wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the beginning of something far larger, something that would bind him to Emma's life in ways he could not yet understand, something that would shake the foundations of his own world and rebuild parts of him he never knew were broken. And though he didn't know how, he sensed that nothing would ever be the same. Olivia stepped back to let them enter, but it was clear the act cost her strength. Her hand remained pressed to the doorframe as if she needed it to stay upright, and Noah noticed immediately how thin her wrist was beneath the loose fabric of her sleeve. The living room they stepped into was dimly lit by a single lamp standing crookedly in the corner, its yellow light casting long shadows across the walls. The air smelled faintly of medicine, boiled water, and something burnt, as though a meal had been attempted and abandoned halfway through. It wasn't dirty, but it carried the unmistakable heaviness of a home where illness had taken root and refused to leave. A small couch with sagging cushions stood against one wall, a blanket neatly folded on top as if someone had been resting there moments earlier. Noah's gaze drifted to the table nearby, where an array of pill bottles sat scattered in uneasy disarray, some nearly empty, others long expired. Next to them was a medical bill stamped with red letters that made his stomach twist. The entire room looked like it had been held together by sheer willpower, as if Olivia had been trying to keep life running with whatever scraps she had left. "Please, sit," she said quietly, though her voice trembled at the effort. She gestured toward the couch but seemed embarrassed by its condition. Jack Patterson remained standing for a moment, taking in the surroundings with a gaze Noah knew well, sharp, observant, but layered here with something his son could only describe as recognition. Jack had grown up poor, though Noah had only heard the details in fragments over the years. The tightness in his father's posture told him those memories were resurfacing now, stronger than ever. After a short silence, Jack gently guided Olivia toward the armchair instead. "You sit," he said with an uncharacteristic softness. "We're fine." Olivia hesitated but sank into the chair, folding her hands together to steady them. Noah sat on the edge of the couch, anxious and alert, while his father settled beside him, leaning forward with calm determination. Emma didn't appear right away, and Noah found himself glancing down the hallway, trying to glimpse the little girl he'd carried so much worry for. Olivia noticed. "She's in her room," she said softly. "She fell asleep early. She's been very tired lately." Noah's chest tightened. He thought of the fall, the hunger, the way she had swayed on her feet. He couldn't shake the memory of her small fingers gripping his blazer as if it were the only steady thing in her world. Jack cleared his throat, signaling that it was time to face the truth directly. "Your daughter is not eating properly," he said. Not accusatory, not harsh, just a statement of fact. "And from what my son tells me, neither are you." Olivia's eyes dropped to the floor. She seemed to shrink into the fabric of the chair, her shoulders folding inward as if the weight of the truth was physically pressing down on her. "I'm doing the best I can," she whispered, her voice frayed. "It's just, things have been difficult. I didn't expect the treatment to be so expensive. I thought." Her voice broke off, and she swallowed hard, unable to continue. Noah leaned forward gently. "Emma told me she wants you to eat the food instead of her. She said you need it more." The words cut through the air like a blade. Olivia covered her mouth, but the sound that escaped was a choked sob. She tried to fight it, to stay composed, but her body trembled beneath the strain. The exhaustion, the fear, the guilt, everything she had been holding in seemed to flood to the surface. "I never wanted her to worry," she managed to say through tears. "She's just a child. She shouldn't have to see me like this. She shouldn't have to feel responsible." "But she does," Jack said quietly. "And children notice more than we want them to. She's been starving herself to take care of you." Olivia let out a broken breath and nodded weakly. "I know. I know it's wrong. But I didn't know what else to do. I've been trying to get more shifts when I feel well enough, but I keep getting weaker. And the bills," she pressed a hand against her forehead as if trying to hold her thoughts together. "I'm scared. I'm so scared she'll be taken from me if anyone finds out how bad it is. Jack exchanged a glance with Noah, and for once Noah saw something almost human in his father's stern eyes: pain, empathy, perhaps even the faint remnants of a past he rarely spoke about. Jack took a slow breath and leaned closer. We didn't come here to judge you. We came because no child should collapse from hunger at school. And no mother should face a battle like this alone. Olivia stared at him, confusion flickering through her expression. Why would you help us? You don't even know us. It was Noah who answered, his voice steady with a sincerity Olivia had not expected from a boy his age. Because Emma matters, he said. And so do you. And because no one else stepped in. Silence settled over the room again, thick but gentler this time. Olivia's tears slowed as she looked from Noah to his father, searching for any sign of deception. She found none. Jack finally stood, straightening his coat. Pack what you need, he said. We're taking you to the hospital tonight. The best one. They'll run tests, give you proper treatment, and make sure Emma is safe. Everything will be covered. Olivia stared at him as if he were speaking another language. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She shook her head instinctively, overwhelmed. I can't accept that. I can't take something so big from strangers. For her, Noah said softly, nodding toward the hallway where Emma slept. Do it for her. Let someone help for once. Olivia's face crumpled, not in refusal this time but in surrender. A surrender born from love, from desperation, from the realization that she no longer had the strength to keep fighting alone. She closed her eyes and whispered, for her, yes. In the next room, Emma stirred in her sleep, unaware that the world was shifting on her behalf, unaware that the boy who had said, I'm with you, meant it more deeply than she could have imagined, unaware that the door to their darkest chapter had just begun to open, so that a new one, brighter and full of fragile hope, could take its place. The hospital corridor was brighter than anything Olivia had seen in months. Its polished floors reflected the overhead lights like a quiet river of glass, and the gentle beeping of distant machines echoed in soft, rhythmic patterns. It felt surreal to her, almost dreamlike, as if she had stepped out of her old life and into a place where time moved differently. Noah walked beside her, matching his pace to her weakened steps, while Jack handled the paperwork with the efficiency of a man used to navigating institutions far grander than this one. Even so, he spoke to the staff not with the cold, authoritative tone that built his empire, but with an unusual softness, as though the vulnerability he'd seen in Olivia had awakened a part of him he'd forgotten existed. Olivia was exhausted from the short ride, her legs trembling as she sat down in a waiting room chair. Her breaths were shallow, each one tinged with the lingering pain she'd been hiding for far too long. Noah watched her quietly, feeling a tightness in his chest that he didn't know how to name. She was someone's mother, someone's entire world, and she looked like she had been fighting a silent war with nothing but fading strength to sustain her. He heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Emma stepping hesitantly into the room, rubbing her eyes as she woke from being carried into the car half asleep. The moment Emma saw her mother seated in the sterile hospital room, confusion clouded her expression. She rushed forward and grabbed Olivia's hand, her voice quivering with fear. Mom. What's happening? Why are we here? Olivia forced a smile that faltered at the edges. It's okay, sweetheart. We're just getting me checked, that's all. But Emma wasn't convinced. Children sense lies with uncanny accuracy, especially lies told out of love. She glanced at Noah, her blue eyes still sleepy but sharp with instinct, as if asking him to translate the adult world into something she could understand. Noah crouched beside her, meeting her gaze carefully. Your mom needs some help to get better, he said gently. She's been sick for a long time, and the doctors here know how to help her feel strong again. Emma's lower lip trembled. Because she doesn't eat either, she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. Olivia let out a soft, painful sound, but before she could respond, Noah placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. "Because she needs real care," he said. "And now she's going to get it." A nurse entered and asked Olivia to follow her for initial evaluations. As she stood, her body swayed, and Noah instinctively reached out to steady her. Olivia gave him a grateful nod before disappearing down the hallway with the nurse. Emma watched her mother go with wide, frightened eyes, and Noah sat beside her on the chair, wishing he had the perfect words to erase that fear. Time in the waiting room stretched slowly, filled with the faint hum of ventilation and the distant sounds of doctors speaking in calm, measured tones. Emma clutched Noah's sleeve, holding onto him as if he were the only stable thing left in her world. He didn't push her away or tell her to let go. Instead, he sat perfectly still, letting her take whatever reassurance she needed. It was strange, he thought, how natural it felt to be here for her, to act as though he had always been someone she could lean on. Jack returned after a while, his expression serious but not distressed. He took a seat across from them, folding his hands together. "They're running tests," he explained. "They'll know more soon." Emma looked up at him, cautious. "Will she be okay?" Jack paused, then answered with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "She will be. They're going to take good care of her. I promise." Emma nodded slowly but didn't release Noah's sleeve. Her small fingers tightened around it, and Noah felt the faint tremor in her hand, a silent plea he didn't need her to speak aloud. Hours passed before a doctor finally approached them. His expression was professional but warm, the kind that softened the weight of difficult news. He explained that Olivia's condition was more advanced than expected and that her body had been deteriorating from lack of nutrition and untreated infection. They needed to operate soon. It wasn't optional. But it was also not hopeless, far from it. With proper treatment and time, Olivia could recover fully. Emma listened with wide, wet eyes, absorbing each word like it was a lifeline. When the doctor finished, she turned and buried her face against Noah's arm, crying without sound, the kind of cry that comes from a heart too overwhelmed to understand anything except fear. Noah placed his hand on her back awkwardly, unsure whether he was doing it right but knowing he needed to do something. She felt so small in that moment, so breakable, that he wished he could shield her from everything in the world that might cause her pain. Jack rose and shook the doctor's hand. "Whatever she needs, she gets. Money is not an issue." His voice carried a firmness that left no room for doubt, and the doctor nodded gratefully before returning to the corridor. When Jack sat back down, he looked at Emma with a gentleness his business rivals would never believe. "She won't be alone," he told her. "Not tonight. Not during surgery. Not after." Emma sniffed and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Will you stay with me?" she asked in a shaky voice, though she directed the question toward Noah, not his father. Noah felt something warm and heavy settle in his chest. "I'll stay," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." And he meant it in a way he didn't fully understand yet. When evening settled outside the hospital windows, casting a soft blue tint over the world, Emma fell asleep with her head resting against Noah's shoulder, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Noah remained sitting upright, afraid to move and wake her, aware of how much she needed rest. Jack watched his son from across the room, and for the first time in years, he saw not the heir he had been shaping, not the quiet, dutiful boy he expected to follow in his footsteps, but someone gentler, stronger, and far more capable of compassion than he had ever realized. That night became the beginning of something irreversible. It marked the moment Noah silently vowed to protect Emma with everything he had, even if he didn't yet know what that promise would demand of him. And as the hospital hummed quietly around them, carrying Olivia toward a future she hadn't dared imagine, the strange little bond between a lonely boy and a hungry, brave girl began to root itself deeper, transforming him in ways no one could have predicted. The night of the surgery unfolded slowly, stretching into a long, trembling ribbon of hours that none of them would forget. The hospital lights dimmed slightly after midnight, casting softer shadows that flickered across the walls every time a nurse passed by. The world outside had gone quiet, and inside, the steady beeping of medical monitors created a rhythm that Noah clung to because it was the only thing that didn't feel fragile. Emma slept fitfully in the chair beside him, occasionally stirring, her fingers unconsciously tightening around his hand as if she feared he might slip away if she loosened her grip. She was exhausted, but fear kept her dreams uneasy, and each small whimper she let out twisted painfully inside Noah's chest. Jack returned every hour with updates, his face carved with worry he tried to hide. The man who commanded boardrooms and terrified competitors now moved through the hospital like any other father, anxious and restless, pacing the corridor with a relentless need to do something even though this was one battle money couldn't speed up. Noah watched him and saw, for the first time, the human version of the man behind the empire, someone who had known hardship, understood desperation, and recognized the look in Olivia's eyes because he had once seen it in his own mother. When the doctor finally approached them at dawn, his scrubs wrinkled and his expression tired but relieved, Noah felt every muscle in his body tense. He held Emma a little tighter as she blinked awake, sensing the shift in the air. The doctor crouched to her level, his voice gentle as he explained that her mother had pulled through. The infection had been severe, the malnutrition dangerous, but Olivia had survived the operation. She wasn't out of danger yet, but for the first time in months, the path ahead wasn't a cliff, it was a long road, difficult but possible. Emma burst into tears of relief, and Noah wrapped his arms around her gently, unsure how to comfort her except by holding her as close as a trembling 6-year-old needed to be held. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed, and he let her cry until her little body went limp again with exhaustion, the weight of her fear finally lifting. Later that morning, when Olivia was moved to a recovery room, the three of them were allowed inside. The room smelled of antiseptic and soft cotton, the blinds partially drawn to keep the harsh morning sun from overwhelming her. Olivia looked incredibly fragile beneath the blankets, her skin pale, her hair damp from sweat, but her breathing was steady, and her pulse monitor glowed with reassuring consistency. Emma rushed to her bedside and took her mother's hand with both of hers, whispering her name through tears. Olivia's eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment she seemed disoriented, but then her gaze landed on her daughter, and relief washed over her face. Her voice was barely audible. "You're safe." Emma nodded vigorously, then looked at Noah, who stood awkwardly near the doorway, as if afraid to intrude on something sacred. Olivia followed her daughter's gaze and managed a weak, grateful smile. "You," she whispered, and though the word was soft, it carried immense weight. "Thank you, for helping her." Noah shook his head quickly. "It was nothing. Anyone would have done it." But Olivia's eyes said otherwise. She had seen enough of the world to know how rarely people stepped into someone else's suffering without hesitation, without gain, without questions. She wanted to say more, but her strength faded, and she drifted back into sleep, her fingers still curled around Emma's. Over the next several days, the hospital became a strange kind of home for all of them. Jack handled meetings over the phone from the waiting area, canceling appointments and shifting his responsibilities in ways that shocked his assistants. He never complained. He never hinted that this situation burdened him. In fact, the longer he stayed, the calmer he became, as if doing something genuinely good, something not tied to reputation or publicity, reminded him of the person he used to be before the world hardened him. Noah spent nearly every hour by Emma's side. He read to her, played quiet games with her in the corner of the room, and brought her juice cartons from the cafeteria because she refused to leave her mother's bedside even to eat. Nurses smiled at their unlikely friendship, the wealthy teenager who carried himself with serious maturity, and the tiny girl who clung to him like he was her anchor in a storm. One afternoon, while Emma was napping on the couch near the window, Noah stepped out into the hallway to stretch his legs. He found his father standing at the end of the corridor, staring out at the parking lot with an expression Noah had never seen before, something like contemplation mixed with regret. "You care about them," Jack said quietly without turning around. Noah hesitated. "Yeah. I do. Jack nodded slowly, still gazing outside. You're more like your mother than you know. The statement felt like a punch and a gift at the same time. Noah's mother had died when he was young, but he remembered her warmth, her softness, the way she had fought to make the world feel gentle even when life had been anything but. To be compared to her was something he never expected. Jack sighed and finally looked at his son. You did something good, Noah. Something important. Most people with our resources forget to look around. You didn't. For a moment, Noah didn't know what to say. He had always assumed his father wanted him to be untouchable, unshakable, focused only on success. But now his father's eyes were filled with something that looked almost like pride. When Noah returned to the room, Emma stirred awake and reached for him without opening her eyes, her small hand searching for reassurance. Noah sat beside her and let her hold his fingers. She leaned into him, innocent trust radiating from her in a way that made his chest tighten. He understood something then, something enormous and frightening and beautiful. Helping Emma hadn't just changed her life. It had changed him. It had shown him a kind of purpose he had never felt while studying business or preparing to inherit a company. It had given him a reason to care deeply, fiercely, with all the intensity he usually reserved for hiding his emotions. He didn't know what the future would demand of him or how long he would remain part of Emma's life, but he knew with absolute certainty that he didn't want to leave her behind. Not now. Not ever. And somewhere in the quiet heart of the hospital, as machines hummed and Olivia slept peacefully for the first time in months, something like hope took root, delicate, fragile, but real. The weeks that followed settled into a gentle, strangely comforting rhythm, one that wove Noah, Emma, and Olivia's lives together in ways none of them could have anticipated. Olivia continued her recovery under the careful watch of the medical team, her strength returning slowly but steadily. The doctors were optimistic, reminding her that healing would take time but that her chances were good now that she was finally getting the care she needed. Emma remained by her side every day, always watchful, always tender, as if afraid her mother might slip away the moment she looked elsewhere. Noah and Jack were there almost constantly, becoming a fixture in the hospital hallways, a presence the staff grew used to, whispering among themselves about the wealthy father and son who had practically adopted the little girl with the sad blue eyes. Noah discovered that caring for Emma came to him more naturally than he could have imagined. She trusted him with a depth that startled him, reaching for his hand without hesitation, asking him questions she was too shy to ask adults, leaning against him when the fear crept back into her small frame. There was something instinctive about the way he responded to her, protective, steady, unwavering, something that made him feel older, stronger, and more grounded than any classroom or business lesson ever had. Their bond deepened with each passing day, shaped by shared moments that felt simple but held quiet significance. He helped her with her homework, even though she often grew distracted and began drawing little flowers in the margins instead of solving math problems. He listened to her stories about school, about the kids who had laughed when she fell, about the loneliness she'd learned to hide because she didn't want her mother to feel worse. He taught her how to fold paper airplanes, smiling when she insisted on making a tiny one just for her mother because mommy needs happy things around her. Jack, meanwhile, found himself watching his son with a mixture of pride and bittersweet reflection. He had never expected Noah to step into someone else's suffering with such sincerity, had never imagined that his quiet, disciplined boy would have such a deep well of compassion hidden beneath his practiced composure. Jack's own childhood flickered at the edges of his mind, memories of hunger and struggle and the desperate need for someone to care. He recognized in Olivia and Emma the same kind of fear he had once lived with, and something inside him softened in a way it hadn't in years. There were moments when he found himself sitting beside Olivia's bed, talking quietly with her while Emma and Noah played by the window. Olivia's voice remained weak, but her mind was clear, and her gratitude was a constant, fragile warmth that Jack didn't quite know how to accept. They spoke about her job, her hopes for Emma, her worries about the future, and each time she apologized for being a burden, Jack would shake his head firmly, reminding her that she owed them nothing. One evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the room in soft amber light, Olivia asked to see Noah alone. He approached cautiously, unsure what she needed, but when she gestured for him to take the chair beside her bed, he sat silently and waited. Olivia studied him with eyes that were tired but filled with something deep and knowing. She reached for his hand, her touch feather-light but deliberate. "You saved her," she whispered. "Not just the day she fell, but all the days that followed. You gave her safety. You gave her peace." Noah looked down, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of her words. "I didn't do anything special," he murmured. I couldn't walk away." Olivia smiled faintly. "That's exactly what makes it special." Her gaze drifted toward the corner of the room where Emma slept curled up in a blanket, one hand tucked under her cheek, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "She sees you as her anchor," Olivia continued. "As someone she can trust without fear. That kind of bond, it doesn't happen often." Noah swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He didn't know how to explain that he felt the same about Emma in his own way, that her presence grounded him, anchored him, made him feel less alone than he'd felt in years. Olivia squeezed his hand gently. "You've changed her life," she whispered. "And mine too. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," Noah said quickly, almost defensively. "You don't owe me anything." Olivia gave him a soft, tired look, the kind mothers give when they understand something a child hasn't yet learned. "Maybe not," she said. "But I want you to know that if anything ever happens to me, I trust you with her. More than anyone else." The words hit Noah with the force of a tidal wave. He felt his breath catch, felt a sudden ache form deep in his chest. He shook his head fiercely. "Nothing will happen to you," he said, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound steady. "You're getting better. You're going to be fine. Emma needs you." Olivia smiled again, weaker this time. "I know. And I'm fighting. But life isn't predictable, Noah. It can change in an instant." Her eyes slid toward Emma again, soft with aching love. "If it ever does, promise me you'll look after her." Noah hesitated, his heart thundering. He was only 15. He didn't know what the future looked like or what burdens he was meant to carry. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would do anything for Emma. Anything. He nodded slowly. "I promise." Olivia's breath shuddered in relief, and she leaned back against her pillow, finally allowing her eyes to close. Noah sat there long after she drifted into sleep, the promise echoing in his mind, growing heavier and brighter all at once. Later that night, he stepped into the quiet hallway and found his father waiting there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Jack looked at Noah's expression and understood immediately that something important had just happened. "Everything all right?" he asked. Noah nodded, though his chest still felt tight. "I made her a promise," he said quietly. Jack studied him for a long moment and then placed a hand on Noah's shoulder, a firm, grounding gesture. "Then we'll keep it," he said simply. "Together." It was the first time in Noah's life that he felt like he and his father were truly on the same side of something that mattered to both of them, something human and raw and real. And as he looked through the hospital window at the moonlit parking lot below, Noah understood with profound clarity that whatever lay ahead, whatever obstacles, whatever heartbreak, whatever hope, he wasn't going anywhere. Not from Olivia. Not from Emma. Not from the promise that now lived inside him like a second heartbeat. Spring arrived slowly, slipping into the city with the soft warmth of sunlight and the first hints of green returning to the trees. By the time Olivia was finally discharged from the hospital, weeks had passed since the night of her surgery, and the world outside seemed almost reborn. She walked carefully, leaning only slightly on the support of the nurse who accompanied her to the entrance, and when the doors opened and the fresh air touched her face, her eyes filled instantly with tears. Not the tears of fear she had grown so used to, but the fragile, powerful kind that came from realizing she had survived something she never thought she would escape. Emma stood at her side clutching her hand tightly, her eyes shining with excitement and relief, unable to stop smiling even as her tiny frame shook with emotion. Noah and Jack waited just beyond the curb, the black car parked near the entrance, and when Emma spotted them, she waved so enthusiastically that she nearly toppled forward. Noah hurried to catch her, laughing softly as she wrapped her arms around him in a hug that seemed far too big for her small body. Olivia walked toward them slowly, each step measured, but her smile grew with every inch. She had color in her cheeks again, and though she still looked tired, there was life in her gaze now, a spark of strength returning after being dimmed for so long. When she reached them, Jack stepped forward first, offering his arm with a formality that softened into warmth when she accepted it. There was no need for flowery speeches or grand gestures. The simple act of helping her into the car felt like the beginning of something healed. The ride back to their neighborhood was quiet but peaceful. Emma sat between her mother and Noah, her fingers entwined with both of theirs as if she feared letting go of either. She talked excitedly about everything she wanted to show Olivia once they were home, drawings she had made, a little paper airplane Noah taught her to fold, a bracelet a nurse had given her. Olivia listened, nodding and smiling, occasionally brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, her love for Emma radiating so strongly that Noah felt it like sunlight. It struck him how different she looked now compared to the day he had first stepped into their house. Then she'd seemed like a candle about to burn out, flickering in the wind with no one to shield it. Now, though still delicate, she looked present, awake, fighting. When they reached the small house, Noah felt a strange wave of nostalgia wash over him. The peeling paint, the crooked steps, the creaking door, everything was just as it had been, yet the air felt different. Jack surveyed the home quietly, his eyes sharp, calculating possibilities, already forming plans he hadn't yet spoken aloud. He didn't like how unstable the steps looked or how damp the kitchen wall felt when he brushed his hand against it, and he certainly didn't like the idea of Olivia returning to the conditions that had pushed her health to the brink. But he said nothing for now. It wasn't the moment. Emma rushed inside first and immediately began showing her mother every tiny detail, from the stuffed animal she kept on the shelf to the little drawing she had taped to the fridge. Noah followed with Olivia's small hospital bag, setting it gently on the couch. Olivia paused as she looked around the room, her eyes clouding with emotion. "It looks different," she whispered, though nothing had changed. But Noah understood. When life nearly slips away from you, the world takes on a new shape, and even the old spaces feel somehow transformed. As the hours passed, the four of them settled into an oddly natural rhythm. Jack repaired a loose cabinet door in the kitchen without being asked. Noah helped Emma clean and organize her school supplies. Olivia rested on the couch, drifting between sleep and conversation, watching them with gratitude she couldn't put into words. When the afternoon sun crept through the windows, filling the house with warm light, Emma curled up beside Noah on the floor as they played a quiet card game, giggling whenever he let her win. Olivia watched them with a softness in her eyes that seemed to erase years of worry in a single sweep. Later in the evening, when Emma had fallen asleep with her head on Noah's lap, Olivia motioned for him to join her near the doorway. She spoke quietly, her voice steady but filled with unspoken emotion. "You've done so much for us," she said. "More than I ever thought anyone would." Noah shook his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just didn't want Emma to go through everything alone." Olivia smiled. "I know. And I'll never forget the way you stepped in. You saved her childhood, Noah. You gave her safety when she had none." She took a slow breath, her eyes lingering on her daughter. "But I want you to know something else, you saved me too. I was losing hope. I thought I wouldn't be around for her much longer. You brought me back." Her words hit him so deeply that he could barely respond. He felt his throat tighten, but before he could speak, he sensed his father approaching behind him. Jack placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder gently, a gesture that surprised them both, and said, "You don't have to face any of this alone anymore." Olivia looked up at him, startled. "Jack, you've already done so much." "We're not finished," Jack said firmly. "This home isn't safe for you and your daughter. Your finances are unstable. Your health needs monitoring. You don't have family nearby, and the two of you shouldn't have to struggle just to survive." Olivia opened her mouth to protest, but Jack held up a hand. "I'm not offering charity," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I'm offering support. A chance to rebuild. You're strong, Olivia. Too strong to fall back into the life that almost killed you." Noah nodded in agreement, stepping closer. "You promised you'd do whatever was best for Emma. Let us help you do that." Olivia closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of their sincerity. When she opened them again, they shimmered with tears. "I don't know how to accept something so big," she whispered. "You already have," Jack said gently. "Every time you let us stand by you, every time you let Noah comfort Emma, every time you let yourself rest instead of fighting alone, that was acceptance. The rest will follow." Silence settled over them, soft and full, the kind that wraps around people who have finally stopped falling. Months passed after that conversation, and life slowly transformed. Jack helped Olivia move into a safer, brighter home closer to better schools and medical care. Olivia regained her strength, eventually starting a part-time job that brought her pride rather than exhaustion. Emma blossomed like a wildflower, her cheeks filling with color, her laughter returning with a lightness Noah had never heard before. And Noah remained by her side through it all, studying with her, picking her up from school, teaching her new games, becoming the steady presence she ran to whenever the world felt too big. Their bond deepened even as the years continued forward. Noah grew into a young man shaped not by the expectations of wealth but by the quiet, powerful promise he had made beside a hospital bed. Emma grew into a bright, joyful girl who trusted him with parts of herself she shared with no one else. And Olivia, once fragile and fading, became a woman filled with new strength, carrying her gratitude not as a burden but as a reminder of the miracle that had saved her life. The story did not end with grand declarations or dramatic scenes. It ended with something far more meaningful, a family built not by blood, but by kindness, chosen loyalty, and the courage to step into someone else's darkness and bring light. On a warm evening years later, as Noah sat on the porch watching Emma chase fireflies across the yard, he realized that the promise he once made, the promise that had terrified him, had become the foundation of a life richer than anything he'd ever imagined. He was no longer the lonely boy who watched the world from behind a polished mask. He had grown into someone whole, someone grounded, someone fiercely connected to the people he loved. And Emma, now healthy and overflowing with laughter, wasn't just the girl he had once picked up from the cold ground. She was the little sister of his heart, the person who had unknowingly given him direction, purpose, and something he had never had before, a family shaped by choice. As Olivia stepped onto the porch and sat beside him, her smile soft and full of meaning, Noah understood what the journey had truly been about. Not saving them, but saving each other.